one hard drive smuggled in a briefcase, one engineer with a fake job offer, one Jesuit priest with hollowed-out walking canes. Industrial secrets are stolen across every era of history, and the thefts have launched industries, broken companies, and changed the global balance of economic power. These are the most consequential corporate espionage cases ever documented. Counting down the 10 greatest corporate espionage operations in history. Number 10. The Lopez Affair. In March 1993, the influential purchasing chief at General Motors, José Ignacio López de Urayurchua, abruptly resigned and moved to Volkswagen, along with 7 of his deputies. General Motors immediately alleged that Lopez had taken thousands of confidential GM purchasing documents, supplier contracts, and internal cost structures with him, the kind of data that allowed GM's component sourcing to be replicated. German prosecutors opened a criminal investigation. Boxes of GM documents were eventually located in apartments connected to Lopez and his colleagues. Volkswagen, facing potential litigation that could have run into billions of dollars, settled the matter in 1996 by paying GM $100 million in cash and committing to purchase $1 billion in GM parts over 7 years. Lopez himself was personally indicted in Germany. The case was eventually settled out of court in 1998, with Lopez paying a personal fine. The case set a benchmark for how Western automotive firms valued their internal cost structure data and how aggressively rivals would pursue it. Number 9. Hilton versus Starwood. In 2009, 2 senior executives, Ross Klein and Amar Lalvani, left Starwood Hotels and Resorts to join Hilton Worldwide as the heads of Hilton's new luxury and lifestyle brand initiative. What they took with them, according to Starwood's complaint, included over 100,000 digital files containing brand strategy, design specifications, and competitive analysis from Starwood's W Hotels program. Starwood sued Hilton in federal court in 2009, alleging the new Hilton brand was being built directly on stolen Starwood intellectual property. Discovery revealed that thousands of confidential Starwood documents had been transferred onto personal storage devices in the days before the executives departed. In late 2010, Hilton settled the case. The terms included a multi-million-dollar payment to Starwood, an injunction against Hilton developing certain branded hotel concepts for 2 years, and ongoing court supervision of the relevant Hilton brand teams. The settlement was widely interpreted in the hospitality industry as one of the more humiliating outcomes for a major lodging brand in its expansion strategy. Number 8. Uber versus Waymo. In early 2017, Waymo, the autonomous vehicle subsidiary of Alphabet, formerly known as Google's self-driving car project, filed suit against Uber. Waymo alleged that a former senior Google engineer, Anthony Lewandowski, had downloaded approximately 14,000 internal Waymo files just before resigning. He then founded a self-driving truck startup called Otto, which Uber acquired for nearly $700 million in 2016. Waymo's lawsuit alleged that the Otto acquisition was, in effect, a vehicle for transferring Waymo trade secrets, particularly the company's LiDAR sensor designs, into Uber's own self-driving program. The case went to trial in February 2018. Days into the trial, Uber settled. The terms included Uber paying Waymo equity, worth approximately $245 million at the time, and Uber agreeing not to use Waymo's confidential information. Lewandowski himself was later criminally prosecuted by the United States Department of Justice. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison in 2020. President Donald Trump pardoned him on the 19th of January 2021, his last full day in office. The case redefined how Silicon Valley views employee mobility between competing autonomous driving programs. Number 7. Procter & Gamble versus Unilever. In 2001, an internal Procter & Gamble audit revealed that contractors hired by P&G's hair care division had been retrieving discarded documents from outside Unilever's headquarters in Chicago. The contractors had pulled trash from Unilever dumpsters and recovered information about Unilever's competing hair care product lines and marketing plans. What made this case unusual was that P&G itself disclosed the operation to Unilever. P&G's CEO at the time, John Pepper, personally contacted Unilever to inform them, return the documents, and offer compensation. The two companies negotiated a private settlement reported to be worth roughly $10 million, plus a commitment by P&G to refrain from competing with certain Unilever products for a defined period. No criminal charges were filed because the dumpster retrieval activities, while ethically indefensible by P&G's own standards, were not clearly illegal under United States law. Garbage placed at the curb being generally treated as public property. The internal whistleblowing that triggered the disclosure became a frequently cited example in corporate ethics curricula. Number 6. Kodak versus Sony. Throughout the 1,990 seconds, Eastman Kodak alleged in a series of court filings and trade complaints that Sony had systematically violated dozens of Kodak's digital imaging patents. The dispute escalated into a broader corporate intelligence war, with each side accusing the other of industrial espionage through engineering recruitment. Sony, for its part, alleged that Kodak had engaged in selective hiring of Japanese engineers with prior Sony employment in order to extract specific imaging sensor know-how. The cases were eventually settled in 2004 through a cross-licensing agreement reportedly worth several $100 million in value. But the legacy of the dispute was deeper than the financial settlement. By the time Kodak finally enforced its patents, Sony had already established itself as a dominant player in consumer digital imaging. Kodak collected royalties for years, but its own consumer camera business declined, and the company eventually filed for bankruptcy protection in 2012. In the words of one Kodak executive interviewed after the bankruptcy, "We won the patent fights and lost the war." Number 5. Operation Aurora. In December 2009, Google detected a sophisticated cyber intrusion against its internal systems. Subsequent investigation, led in collaboration with the United States government and security firm McAfee, attributed the operation to advanced persistent threat actors operating out of mainland China. At least 20 other major American corporations were also targeted, including Adobe, Juniper Networks, Yahoo, Symantec, Northrop Grumman, Morgan Stanley, and Dow Chemical. The intrusion specifically targeted source code repositories, intellectual property, and the email accounts of Chinese human rights activists who used Gmail. In January 2010, Google publicly announced the attack and stated that it would no longer censor its Chinese search engine, effectively ending its mainland China operations. The disclosure was unprecedented at the time. Major Western companies had historically kept Chinese cyber espionage incidents private to protect ongoing business relationships. Operation Aurora became one of the foundational cases that pushed Western governments to publicly attribute large-scale corporate cyber espionage to state-affiliated Chinese groups. The economic impact of the operation across the affected companies has been estimated in the billions of dollars in stolen intellectual property value. Number 4. The Coca-Cola formula theft attempt. In May 2006, an executive secretary at Coca-Cola named Joya Williams, working with 2 accomplices, attempted to sell trade secrets stolen from the Coca-Cola company to its arch-rival Pepsi company. The materials reportedly included confidential product samples and proprietary marketing documents related to an unreleased Coca-Cola product. What Williams and her accomplices did not anticipate was that PepsiCo had no interest in the offer. Pepsi immediately reported the contact to Coca-Cola, which in turn reported the matter to the FBI. Federal agents set up a sting operation with an undercover agent posing as a Pepsi representative willing to buy the secrets. Williams and the accomplices agreed to sell, were photographed handing over the materials, and were arrested in July 2006. Williams was convicted in 2007 and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The 2 male accomplices received shorter sentences. PepsiCo's decision to alert Coca-Cola was widely praised as a benchmark of professional corporate conduct, and was framed by Pepsi as a competitive ethics statement against the backdrop of decades of soft drink rivalry. The actual Coca-Cola formula was never compromised. The materials offered were peripheral product samples, not the core syrup recipe. Number 3. DuPont versus Colon Industries. In 2009, the American chemical company DuPont sued the South Korean firm Colon Industries over the theft of trade secrets related to Kevlar, the high-strength fiber used in body armor, fiber optic cables, and aerospace applications. DuPont alleged that Colon had systematically recruited former DuPont engineers and contractors and used their knowledge to develop a competing aramid fiber called Heracron. The case went to jury trial in 2011. A federal court found that Colon had willfully misappropriated DuPont trade secrets and awarded DuPont approximately $920 million in damages, one of the largest trade secret verdicts in United States history at the time. In a parallel criminal case, several Colon employees and the company itself were indicted by the United States Department of Justice. Colon eventually agreed in 2015 to pay an additional combined civil and criminal settlement of $360 million. One former DuPont engineer who had passed information to Colon, Michael Mitchell, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The case is now standard reading in corporate counterintelligence training programs. It is also one of the most expensive corporate espionage outcomes ever recorded for a single chemical product line. Number 2. The Cold War Western Technology Pipeline. Throughout the 1,960 seconds, 1,970 seconds, and 1,980 seconds, the Soviet Union, working primarily through its KGB intelligence service and the GRU military intelligence apparatus, ran one of the largest sustained industrial espionage operations in history. Codenamed Line X within the KGB structure, the program systematically targeted Western technology, microelectronics, computer designs, jet engines, material science, and chemical processes. The scale was staggering. According to documents later defected to the West by KGB officer Vladimir Vetrov in 1981, the so-called farewell dossier, the Soviets had been acquiring an estimated 5,000 pieces of Western military and industrial technology each year. More than 60% of identified Soviet weapons programs in this period contained directly stolen Western design elements. In response, the United States CIA, working with French intelligence on the basis of the Vetrov leak, ran a counter-operation. They reportedly allowed certain modified Western technology to be stolen, with deliberately corrupted software, sabotage designs, and false specifications embedded. One particularly disputed account claims that a Soviet Trans-Siberian gas pipeline explosion in 1982 was caused by sabotaged industrial control software introduced through this counter-espionage operation. Regardless of which specific accounts are true, the broader truth is documented. Soviet weapons systems of the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds were heavily, sometimes embarrassingly, built on Western R&D. In effect, the Western private sector was financing Soviet military research without knowing it, and the #1 greatest corporate espionage case in history. Father Francois Xavier d'Entrecaulles, and the theft of Chinese porcelain manufacturing. For nearly 1,000 years, the Chinese kept the formula for true porcelain, the hard white translucent ceramic prized across Asia and Europe, as a closely guarded state secret. European royalty paid the equivalent of small fortunes for imported Chinese pieces. The materials and firing techniques required to produce comparable porcelain were unknown outside of China. In the early 1700 seconds, the French Jesuit missionary Father d'Entrecaulles was stationed in the city of Jingdezhen, the historical center of imperial Chinese porcelain production. Over years of patient relationship building with local Christian converts who worked in the porcelain factories, d'Entrecaulles gathered detailed observations of the entire manufacturing process. In 1712 and again in 1722, he sent 2 long letters to his Jesuit superiors in France, describing in technical detail the specific clays involved, particularly kaolin and pétunce, the proportions in which they were combined, the firing temperatures, the glaze formulations, and the construction of the kilns. The letters were forwarded to French chemists and ceramic researchers. Within a few decades, European factories began producing true porcelain. By the late 18th century, the Meissen factory in Saxony, Sèvres in France, and Wedgwood in England had developed competitive products. China's near monopoly on the most valuable luxury manufactured good in the world was broken. 1 missionary, 2 letters, the end of a 1,000-year industrial secret. No firewall to breach, no USB drive to smuggle. Just a man with a quill, taking patient notes for a decade. The single largest transfer of manufacturing value in human history. 10 cases, 10 different methods. Some used hackers, some used hired engineers, some used hollow walking canes and missionaries. The technology of corporate espionage has changed beyond recognition. The motive has not. Knowing what your competitor knows, before they know you know, has always been worth more than almost any other piece of intelligence on Earth.